Mike, as a team, we have met as already. We're all part of the presentation team at the museum. It's our job to bring this place to life. And what we're going to try and do for you today is recreate a genuine medieval sword fighting lesson. Because here at the Royal Armoury, in our library, we're very lucky to have a manuscript, a fight manuscript that we like to call 133. Although you might also hear it referred to as the Tower of the Bible, including the Paul Burgess manuscript.
Now, 133 is a very, very interesting manual for three reasons. The first reason is it is the earliest known existing Western European sword fighting stroke martial arts manual. Earliest one that we know of at the moment. The second reason is that the people who are fighting are not the sort of people you would necessarily expect. They're churchmen, they're members of the clergy. It's a priest fighting a scholar or a student, and that might seem strange to some of us today because we don't really think about Western European Christian priests as being martial artists or swordspeople. But what we have to remember is that the time this manual was written was around about 1300. And at this period in Europe, the great military Christian orders of the Templars and the Hospitallers were still around. So perhaps that has something to do with it. Finally, it's interesting because in the last few pages, there is a woman practicing martial arts with the priest. Now, no matter what we see in films and television programs, the honest truth is there is no evidence at all for women practicing martial arts in Western Europe historically at this period. It may be that the woman is symbolic because she's St. Walpurga, who was an English woman who was canonized in Germany and became a saint. So perhaps there's some kind of weird religious reference going on there. But on the other hand, perhaps not. Perhaps we really are seeing a manual that says that at least one woman did practice martial arts in the day.
So who are they then, is the big question. Well, as Keith has already mentioned, what we're seeing is secular clergy. And we know that members of the secular clergy were known to flaunt the rules every so often when they came to what they couldn't do. We also know that some people may have joined the church as a form of retirement also in their lives. So it's possible that we have a retired soldier of some form who's joined the church later in life and put down his form of martial arts for prosperity. At the same time, members of the church could have been learning this as self-defense. They would have been travelling the many dangerous roads that crisscrossed Europe at this time, and being able to carry money, food, and other valuable items, they would have been prime targets for bandits. But by learning this, it could have been to keep themselves safe on the road.
So what are they learning? Well, they're learning a system of fighting with sword and buckler. This was a very, very popular dual weapon system in medieval Europe at the time. So the sword is a plain, relatively short-bladed cut and thrust weapon, and the buckler is a small shield, and sometimes even smaller than these ones. And what makes 133 interesting in a different way is the way in which the sword and the buckler are used. Yes, the sword can be used to cut, it can be used to thrust, but almost all the time in the manual, there's one or two slight variations on this, and one of them we'll come to in a minute. But almost all the illustrations show the sword being covered by the buckler. The buckler never moves away from the sword if the fighter can help it. And this is very different from the majority of other fight manuals that survive from the later Middle Ages that show sword and buckler fighting, where they quite often show the sword being used independently and the buckler protecting the body.
So, the manual itself is divided into a number of plays, which we can call lessons, between a priest, in this case the priest who teaches, played by myself, and the inexperienced scholar is played by Keith, the student. A lifelong learner.
Yes.
But aren't we all?
I'm a mature
student. Now, at the beginning of each of these plays, the combatants will take a guard. The guard is a point from which you can launch an attack or a defense. Now, as the priest, I'm going to take up the first guard. Sword by my side and the shield in front of you. And this could be called the first guard because this is the first position you find yourself. You haven't yet drawn your sword from the scalp. Alternatively, you thought both yourself and Keith walking, holding the sword and the buckler, much like this. So perhaps if you are suddenly set upon by an opponent, this is where you're going to find yourself. More or less.
Right, so I'm going to take a different guard. I'm going to take a guard called the half shield. the half shield guard is where I stand with the buckler covering the sword hand and the sword bisecting the opponent's body with the point in the eyes. So from this position now, if the priest wants to attack me, he has to move round one side or the other. We should just note at this point, in reality, there's no doubt that the scholar would have had to study both sides of any of the plays. We're just going to do all the ones we'll show you one way round.
So here's the first lesson. Don't be the one to attack first, and if you do attack first, engage in a bind.
Now, bind is a medieval technique where you actually take control of your opponent's weapons with your own before forcing an attack through. So you basically attack into the attack. But we're going to come back to that later because for the present...
Of course, that's not to say you can't attack first and you can't attack with a bind, without bind. If I was to do all of that, it might look a little bit like this.
I think it was fast enough, that'd be a dead stop, definitely.
Yeah.
But the chances are I'll be able to see that coming. That's why I took the half shield in the first place. So what's my reply to that? This. This is called a thrust strike. So the bind is coming here, I'm taking control of the sword, forcing it out of line as I come forward with my left leg and sticking it on the way.
Dead brief. So, is there anything I can do to get out of that? Thankfully, yes there is. It's called a shield strike. Alright? Start the same. Hopefully we'll do it right. It's a bit like this. Alright, so slowing it down, doing it once again. I'm still trying to bypass the sword entirely.
I'm still trying to make my thrust strike.
As soon as those blades make contact, I already know it's going sideways for me, so I'm going to use the buckler to push it down, and then what is called a knucken. Either the flipping cut, because it flips the sword up, or the nodding cut. If I cut the throat, it causes my opponent to start nodding. Or deflating, in this case. Either way, I win, happy free.
Alright, but the manual finally says on this particular subject, just beware, because binding is about sensitivity. Once you've taken your opponent's sword, he can feel what you're doing through the sword, which is how Mike knew what I was going to do with the thrust strike. If he knows I'm doing a thrust strike, I might know that he's going to do a shield strike, in which case the sequence will wind up like this. So I get the shield strike in first, he would walk over the sword.
Alright, and that's really as far as it goes, at the end of which one of us or both is going to be dead on value. So, what happens if I change it up by attacking first still, this time engaging the bind from the offset? Maybe it will look a bit like this. So, first guard and the half shield still when I attack first.
Whoa!
Not moving.
Yeah. He's just going to run me back into the wall and stick me anyway. So, he's forcing me back. He's got the advantage. I can't bind against his bind without giving a little and it being a not all in one attack. So I can no longer attack in his attack. I have to take his attack and use it to my advantage. And I can do that by employing a slightly more active kind of bind. So it's going to be a half circle bind that will work something like this. Got it. So what happened there was, he came in with his bind, he thrust through. As I stepped back though, I took his sword out of line and then thrust through the open centre to strike.
Alright, fantastic. Well, I've got some equal for him. So, as this is happening, I can then employ something called changing the sword. Now, what we have here is a gradual building up technique. And as this sequence goes on, it gets more and more complex. And that's a fancy way of me saying it's hard, I might not do it right. Let's see what happens.
No, I think you did that perfectly right.
It seems to work.
It seemed to work, yeah.
So, doing that again, I'm still engaging with the light, still with the sword.
I'm still taking the half circle bind, but as I try and come in with a thrust,
I step backwards. Now you notice that the lifting my sword up. This has changed the sword. Knocking it to one side. I'm not trying to utilise this gap. The reality is, I'm going to push forward, both of our bucklers into my opponent's face. And I quite like teeth, so I don't want to knock his teeth out. So for the purpose of this, I'm knocking it upwards. Regardless, that gap is significantly bigger than Nucken makes a return, and dead scholar has increased.
You know what, though, Mike? It's nearly Christmas, and here we are talking about sticking people with swords and nookening them across the throat.
Not very festive, is it?
No, can we do something slightly less deadly?
I mean, we can. Yeah. Nothing went
Are you disappointed?
I am. Alright, so I won't tell you what we're going to do.
Alright. And he cannot tell me what he's going to do, because that's the whole point of this kind of training. We're repeating the same initial gambit over and over again. The question is, what are the variations?